Hello all. All Quiet on the Western Front. Not the novel by Eric Maria Remarque, but game published by Moments in History, going back to '97, designed by Ted Raicer. I remember asking Ted a question about the game and saying I was enjoying it, and what's your next design after this one? And he said, I'm working on something called Paths of Glory. So that does date it, doesn't it, somewhat? So this one covers essentially the Kaiserschlacht of 1918. So the German sort of last chance saloon, really, to try and get a decision on the Western Front before the arrival of the American forces in too many numbers. He did do a game in Command magazine called Storm in the West, which I think GMT have republished, which is which I do own. It's quite a nice game. It's a core scale game, and I think I read somewhere that he wanted to do a divisional game, but there wasn't the capacity in a magazine format. As I said, that was in the Command magazine. So I think that the All Quiet on the Western Front design was the one he really wanted to do. So this was released initially by Moments in History, and it was redone by Critical Hit, but not redone very well in my opinion. It was touted as an enlarged map with bigger counters. The map was about the same size. I think the hexes were maybe half a millimetre bigger across the flats, and they'd increased the counters to 5/8 from ½ inch, but with the same size font, so you were left with a lot of space around the outside. They just looked a bit odd, and all it did really was increase the sort of counter clutter, because there was less space between the counters. Everything seemed a bit crammed on the map. So I did have it, and there were also map issues. There were some missing letters and maybe even some names, so not great. But I think there may be a third edition, so maybe all that's been put right. If anyone is aware, let me know in any comments below. I think it's a really nice game. Probably would have been in my top 20. It wasn't mentioned in my top 10 because I hadn't played it for a long time. I'm going to play it solitaire. It plays fine solitaire. There's no hidden information. So it covers the initial attack in the March of 1918, and it goes on to November. So it covers the big push, the Allied counteroffensive. So both sides get to attack, and it's an interesting dynamic on victory, because essentially both sides start with a certain morale level, and you essentially lose morale when you capture, or when you lose some of your starting towns and cities, and they're rated A, B or C, and you roll on a table, the A's being worth more than the B's, and the B's and C's, and you will forfeit a number of morale points when you lose a city, and you don't know quite how many. So there's no perfect planning, which is quite nice. The Allies gain morale as the American divisions enter. All sides lose morale as time goes on, so every turn I think the French lose 2 and the British and the Germans both lose 1 morale point. That sort of battle fatigue setting in. Lots of rules for the Stoss division. They're essentially more effective at attacking, as they should be. It's a it's a different sort of combat system. It's not an odds-based system. You just have a number of factors that you fire, and you have column shifts, and you will inflict a number of step losses on the defender, and likewise he on the attacker. And the slots have the benefit that although they take the losses are only counted after they're fired back, so they still get to shoot at their full strength, which is quite nice for them. And the Allies similarly have tank units which let them fire first, so the defender losses are inflicted before they do defensive fire. But one of the tank counters involved in the attack will always break down, so you'll always take one loss plus whatever the defender managed to inflict in the defensive fire. So there's lots of chat about different strategies for this, opportunities to go for either of the two national sides, that you can try and collapse the French and you get a win, or you can try and collapse the British and Commonwealth units. Some people have said this is an auto win for this, that and the other. Never really seen it. Maybe if I played it a lot more I might be convinced that there is a foolproof winning strategy. But it's a great game to play. There's a little twist as well. There's the you get to activate HQs, which give you barrages. The downside is that when you activate HQs, that also saps up some of your morale. So there are national limits on how many you can activate, but as you're pushing harder, activating more HQs, that's costing you more morale. So you're sort of caught in one of the horns of a dilemma. You know, should I be activating? I think the German limit is sort of 3 a turn. So you're going to be doing quite a bit of damage, but you're also going to be losing three morale points a turn. There's a simplistic but nice system to reflect the air power in the game. They can either be used to spot for artillery, to strafe the defending trenches, or go for air superiority, where you essentially just negate the other guy's air. One thing I would say on the strategic movement of HQs, the rule that appeared in the game wasn't the rule that Ted originally conceived for the game. He was going to allow HQs to move along the rail tracks, but count as 2 divisions. There are limits on the number of divisions you can move by rail each turn. The Allies are 4, and they're 6, and the Germans are 4. And his ruling was that you can move an HQ by rail, but that counts as 2 divisions. The rule that was eventually used in the game was that you could perform a strategic move with the headquarters, and you could essentially teleport it forward into a bulge, where on the following turn it could become active. And I think from reading some of the old posts that I've got copies of, that Ted felt that once the sort of needle had swung back the other way, that it was almost impossible for the Germans to win the game defensively, because the Allies could just strap move their headquarters forward into the various breakthroughs and sort of pile on the hurt. It does take away a little bit, of course, in a similar vein to the German offensive on the first half of the game. But I'm going to try this particular one with Ted's original moves for using the railroads to move HQs. So I'll show you around the map. The other nice little twist is that the game turns are of an indeterminate length, because you have a couple of impulses where you get to move and barrage and combat, etc. and then I think at the end of the third, they call them couplets, at the end of the third couplet you roll a d6, and that might end, or you might go on and do another couplet. So it's difficult to, I think maximum you could have 7 couplets if you can roll. I think the chance of that is pretty remote, but in theory you could have up to 7 couplets, which would be obviously something very difficult to plan for, certainly defensively. So let's have a look at the map. Right. An overview initially. You can see it's 2 standard maps which I've actually had laminated. I've had this game quite a while now, and the maps are still in a good state. But I think a very attractive map. I think Moments in History did some quite nice. They didn't do many games, but the ones they did tended to be quite attractive. And this one is, I think, one of the better ones actually. So you can see the front line. Here we've got there's Nancy. You can see some of the Stoßtreppen. Those are fortified trench lines. You also have primary and secondary trench lines. So I'm going for a French knockout blow. Going to have the Stoss breaking through there, and if we move up the line, hopefully they'll also create a breakthrough here. There's about 25 or so Stoss divisions in that region. There's also the Brockmüller counter that can be attached to any HQ to give you barrage bonuses. That's the join in the those gaps in the line are actually intentional, according to the scenario setup. For some that would be a very tempting target, but the problem is it's at the join of the 2 armies, so you end up fighting them both, which, I don't know, that's another one to explore. If you go for a serious push through the middle, you'll see Paris is just there, and there are 5 hexes, all of A class cities, so you could get lots of morale losses there. Essentially the cities on the southern map affect the French, and the northern map affect the British. So this is the British line. The Allies all set up first, though then the Germans can choose their setup, and so the British are going to have to try and counter-attack to take some pressure off the French. There's the Belgian contingent. These guys there, that is the reserve, where it says Germany. It says put them anywhere on the map, convenient. So there are a number of, I think there's 17 divisions there in reserve, which you have to have. Again, someone else thought that without a reserve being required, that the Germans could actually run away with the game. Again, I'm not convinced of that, but I'm going to go along with Ted's recommendation of having at least 17. You can have up to 24 is the maximum, but 17 is the recommended minimum. German aircraft, including the Baron, he acts as a normal aircraft until he gets shot down, and that affects the German morale. The Allies only start with 3, but they get more as the turns move on. And here's the sequence of play. So you can see 1 couplet. First 3 are guaranteed, and then you roll at the end of the 3rd one. And so you could have 7 if the dice gods align. And this is the table I mentioned about morale loss for captured cities. So there you go. It's a quick overview of the game, and we'll see how it pans out.